welcome back to the realm of history. We're going to be here tonight for chapter 31 review time. Also got a little bit of an agenda. It's the same agenda every week. Just try to keep it simple. Number one, I'll start off with a little bit of key advice. We'll talk about some of the terms that I've selected, some of the figures that I've selected. We'll go over just a few of the short answer questions and possibilities. I'll have a very brief AP advice. There's only going to be one MCQ, so there's not a whole lot to talk about there. And then I'll open up for a question and answer session, and then hopefully provide some final advice before we do get on with our night. One of the things I would say is if you find these reviews helpful, go ahead and hit the like button. And also, while you're waiting to get started here, give me a hello in the comments so that I know who attended, and we can see how we do on the quiz compared to those who don't attend. Okay, a little bit of key advice for this afternoon session or this evening session, whatever you want to call it. I would suggest that you write down some of the key things from the session. I think it's always good to help your mind comprehend material when you write it down. There are studies that prove that that is true. Number two, pray for the right things. Make sure that you are praying for your family, for their health, for your health and safety. Those are things that I would encourage you to pray for. I would encourage you to pray for good scores on this quiz or, good results in a game or some type of athletic event, but rather just make sure that you're praying for the proper things. Number three, be here now. Make sure that tomorrow when it's time to take the quiz, when you come into the world history classroom, when you enter the realm, that you pop in history, and that you're there now, that you're not thinking about other classes or what you have going on socially or what you have going on in your athletic world. But just give your sole devotion to the quiz and to world history. And hopefully that will help you concentrate and focus on the task at hand. Number four, I say this every week, but I think it's probably one of the most important things I can tell you. While you have the time, say thank you to your parents. I say this a lot, but they really do so much for you. And now that I'm coaching track, I'm starting to realize that, your parents picking you up, dropping you off at these different odd times, waiting for you in the parking lot. There's a lot of devotion and love and care and commitment there. So I think you should definitely make sure that you take some time tonight before you go to bed and say thank you to your parents. Number five, I don't see this quiz as a very difficult one. I was looking at it tonight, kind of going over it. I think it's kind of an easy one in my mind, but I'm not always the best predictor of those type of things. So I hope that you would meet the challenge tomorrow, that you rise to the occasion. The AP part's always a challenge. I'm gonna front you 4 points there, and then each one will be worth 2. So you're gonna have 6 points that you can get. The lowest you can get is a 4, which I think is a positive. But you should be able to. After all the experience that I've given you this year, you should be able to meet that challenge and rise to the occasion. Okay, I think I'm done talking about that. Let's go into the key terms. I've selected, looks like on my sheet, about 3/4 of the terms to go over. So I'll go over those with you, and then I'll talk briefly about some of the short answer and very briefly about the AP portion. And then we can go ahead and get into, of course, the question and answer session. I'm hoping that you'll have some good questions, and I may or may not answer all of them. We'll see if I feel like it's necessary or not. Okay, here we go. We've got war debts and reparations. A lot of students had questions about this. It's pretty simple. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles had the war guilt clause, so they blamed a lot of what happened on Germany, and they forced Germany to pay back the Allies for war damages or money spent by the Allies to fight the war against Germany. That's something called reparations, and war debts are meaning what the Allies had from fighting against Germany in the war. This next one is a chart about fascism. Fascism's on the list, but it says page 911. So I'm going to go ahead real quick and share that chart with you and talk about, what I think is most important to gather from that chart. So we'll go ahead and see that here in just one moment, and you'll be able to see what page I'm talking about. It's right here. What you can see here is that fascism is a political movement that promotes, of course, nationalism and militarism. It doesn't provide for much individual rights, but rather everything's about supporting the state or the country. This chart, I'm not going to go over this whole chart with you because it is in your textbook. It's on page 911, but it talks about some of the characteristics of fascism: economics, cultural factors, social factors, some of the examples that practice fascism: Italy, Spain, Germany, some of the basic principles and some of the political ideologies that you might see inherent with fascism, like racism, like nationalism, like a one-party rule, like a supreme authoritarian leader, so on and so forth. All right, we're back to the normal screen here. Hopefully that was beneficial for you, and then you can find that in your text. The vast majority of you don't bring your textbooks to class, even though I ask you every day. But you probably have them somewhere at home, so you can use those to get ready. All right, next is Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf is a book written by Hitler. It means my struggle. And it really kind of outlined his plans for the future of Germany. He was in jail. He was in prison for trying to overthrow the government when he wrote it. And so, it kind of details, how he felt about this master race idea, this Aryan race, how he felt about the Jewish population, talked about Lebensraum, which was this idea that he was going to go out and conquer other lands. So a lot of his plans were written there in Mein Kampf. Lebensraum, as I just mentioned, is German word for living space. It was the ideology to create more territory for Germany through conquest. His targets were, of course, Eastern European countries and then later Russia. So we'll learn about that as we get into chapter 32. Nazism is the German, it's simple. You could define it as the German form of fascism. They use symbols like the swastika. They use the stormtroopers, the Gestapo, these type of military forces, these private militias to help solidify their viewpoints. But it's a political party in Germany post-World War I. A coalition government. The Weimar Republic was an example of a coalition government. It's where there's an alliance of several political parties necessary to form a majority. Unfortunately, they usually don't last very long because when you have to make an alliance out of several different political parties, they still have their individual differences. So when those differences are inherent, it makes it really difficult to come to agreements. And so a lot of times they don't last very long and they're not very successful. Next up is the Non-Aggression Pact. This is very simple. It's kind of an agreement between Germany and Russia that they're not going to fight each other. It didn't mean they were in an alliance. It just was an agreement that they would not have aggression against each other. Nothing stated that if somebody attacks Germany, Russia's going to help them or vice versa. It just said that they're not going to fight each other. That's all it really was. The Munich Conference, the whole point of the Munich Conference was getting together allied nations in Germany, trying to negotiate with Adolf Hitler, basically, to try and get him to stop a planned invasion on Czechoslovakia. That's really what the Munich Conference was about. I think we hit home this week about learning about German inflation. I kind of told you about the price of bread. I talked about how people had to show up at stores with wheelbarrows of money if they wanted to buy a loaf of bread, that kids would play with stacks of money to build doll houses, and they would burn money to stay warm. That's how low in value the money was. But the Dawes Plan was something that actually got Germany out of inflation. It was a $200 million loan from American banks to Germany. It really ended their inflation and it stabilized the German economy. Appeasement was something that was talked about in section 4, which you did the homework on last night. It was where Great Britain, and France decided to give into aggression by Germany to avoid another major war. So they kind of were like, all right, Germany, you can take Sudetenland. All right, now Germany's invading Czechoslovakia. All right, we're not going to get involved because we don't really want to get ourselves back into another total war. We don't want to put our civilians through that. We just came out of World War I, which was devastating to France and all their countryside. They're still rebuilding. So the countries of Great Britain and France, I think, were trying to take steps to avoid a future war. I mean, it didn't work in the end because Hitler continued to make war and continued to push. And then when he invaded Poland, it was kind of like the last straw. But we'll be learning about that in the early sections of chapter 32. The Axis powers, this is an alliance or an agreement between these three countries, Germany, Italy, and then eventually Japan joins in. It starts off as the Rome-Berlin axis, which is kind of in a straight line down Europe. And then Japan comes in, which kind of forms a triangle. Okay, that's kind of the Axis powers. Okay, short answer. There's a lot of them on your sheet. Let's talk first about some of the weaknesses in the U.S. economy that in some way, shape, or form led to the stock market crash. One was that there was a really wide gap of wealth between the rich and the poor. 33% of all of the income was sequestered to about 5% of the population. 60% of people in the U.S. during the 20s were living with a salary of less than $2,000 per year, which at that time was kind of in the poverty level. So that was a very low wage for a year. And so you had, what that meant is that because there were a lot of poor people, 60% in the very poor, they didn't have enough money to buy non-necessary goods. And one of the ways that the economy can grow is when people have enough money to buy non-essential goods. That's what really helps stores grow. And that's one way that they can grow economically. It's not the end all be all, but what we had is that people were only able to buy what they really could afford and what they really, really needed. And so that was one of the factors that kind of led into weakness in the stock market. The more immediate causes of the stock market crash and bank failures, which would be your second one on the list, is the prices were high in October, and everybody thought, well, if the prices are really high, they're bound to come down. I don't think they're going to keep rising. So everybody started to sell their stock, and then the prices started to drop, and then more people wanted to sell before they lost everything. So it caused a panic, which led into the stock market crash. Buying stock on the margin was another factor, because middle income people were making deals with stockbrokers where they would essentially put down like a 10% down payment on a stock, and then the broker would front them the rest of the money. And this was all good. This was all fine and dandy if the stock price in that said stock went up. But if the price fell, then both people lost all their money, the broker and, of course, the person wanting to buy stock. And so if you were a broker and you were selling stock on the margin, you wanted to sell your stock right away before you lost all of your money. So that really causes even more of a panic. So that was also a factor there. I think Hitler and Mussolini's tactics to gain support and control, I think it's censoring the press is number one. Censoring the press, these big rallies that they held, which were to build support, playing patriotic music, stuff like that, were really some of the ways that they gained support and control over the people. Hitler's youth programs, why did he use those? Really, they were meant to kind of brainwash the youth and kind of get them to believe in Nazi ideology. I think that you should know what Nazi ideology is. It's anti-Semitism. It's a little bit of racism. It's talking about supporting the military power, being obedient to the state, being obedient to Adolf Hitler, the Führer, so on and so forth. League of Nations, how did they respond to fascist regimes expanding? Basically, it's Hitler expanding. They used appeasement first. They started by letting the aggressor move and move and move until it got to a point where they could no longer essentially play the appeasement game. They had to get involved militarily. Reasons for appeasement and isolation are very simple. I mean, appeasement, you wanted to avoid an overall total war. And then isolationism, it was something practiced by the United States. It's this idea to stay out of foreign affairs, focus on your own country, build your own economy. That's what the United States was doing prior to World War II. We did it for most of World War II. We didn't get involved until the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And there were a couple of reasons why Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. When we got involved economically, we actually cut our oil shipments to Japan. And also we had some strongholds like the Philippines, Wake Island, and other islands, colonies and territories that we held on the Pacific. And Japan sort of saw that as a dagger to their throat. And so those are some of the factors as to why they bombed Pearl Harbor. Number 7, the causes of German inflation. Well, during World War I, they didn't raise taxes to try and offshoot the fact that they didn't have money going into circulation and they had to pay millions of dollars in reparations to the Allies. They tried to print more money to circulate to the people, and that had a really, really bad impact in reducing the value of the German mark, but also increasing the price of goods at the same time, which is basically the definition of inflation. When there's a drop in the value of money paired with or coupled with an increase in the price of goods. Okay, AP tips and suggestions. My biggest tip I'm going to tell you is pretty simple. It's read AMSCO. Make sure that you did your AMSCO reading. That's really the one I want to tell you. 480 to 502, topics 7.4, 7.5, somewhere in that range there. 7.3, 7.4. The interwar periods, basically. in between World War I and World War II. So if you haven't done your AMSCO reading, it's only 22 pages. I think you could get that done. If you didn't do it or you're not going to do it, I don't feel bad for you if you don't do well in the AP part. So there you have it. That's my tips and advice for getting ready for the AP portion, which is simply an MCQ. It's only going to be 3 questions. There'll be a prompt and 3 questions related to it. Okay, at this time, I'll open up to question and answers. I'll do a question and answer session. I'm going to go to the comments now. Thank you to everybody who's here. Appreciate your support. Okay, I don't see any questions. So go ahead and fire away. Any questions that you have, anything that I can help you with, I am here for you. All right, here we go. All right, Josh. Yeah, this is the rape of Nanking. Nanking or Nanjing is a Chinese city, and the Japanese invaded China. They invaded Manchuria, and then they invaded the rest of China. One of the cities that they did a lot of damage was Nanjing, and what they did is they took over the city, and then once they had taken control of the city, the Japanese soldiers began to rape women. The numbers are like in the thousands, and they also killed many elderly folks that were there too, innocent elders. And so this is like a really sad event that took place, and it's something that leads to animosity between the Chinese and Japanese today. Yeah. Basically, war debts are monies owed to the Allies by Germany based on the Treaty of Versailles. What ended up happening, as I went over first here in the key terms, is that the Treaty of Versailles blamed almost the entirety of World War I on Germany. And so they were given the war guilt clause, and they were forced to pay millions of dollars in reparations. These are payments made by Germany to the Allies to basically repay them for their war debts, the bombs, ammunitions, any losses and casualties that they suffered from the war. The Rome-Berlin Axis is simply the alliance between Italy, which is capital city Rome, and Germany, which is capital city Berlin. So it's Mussolini and Hitler in an alliance, which is called the Axis. Third short answer topic, I was just talking about Hitler and Mussolini using political rallies. I was mentioning that they censored the press or utilized the press to portray propaganda that was helpful to them. So you have some of that going on there. Things of that nature. It shouldn't be necessary for the quiz, but Japan was an empire, so they were ruled by Emperor Hirohito, who was a totalitarian ruler. It's not all that something I would like you to get too bogged down with. They were very militant. They were industrialized, Japan. So they were really moving into a very powerful position coming out of World War I, actually. I just answered that one. The Munich Conference was a meeting between the Allies, like Great Britain and France, and Germany. They were trying to get Hitler to stop his aggression. They were trying to prevent him from invading Czechoslovakia, and that's what they were really negotiating about at the Munich Conference. They basically told him that he could take the Sudetenland, which was a portion of Czechoslovakia, but that he had to stop there. And he took it, and then he kept going. So whatever happened at the Munich conference really didn't have much of a stronghold. It's a $200 million loan from American banks to Germany to help stabilize their economy because they were having super inflation like we learned about in class. And it worked. It did help jumpstart their economy and get them back on track. The New Deal is a program by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt where he tried to get the U.S. economy back on track by putting people into jobs that were mostly called public works projects. To simplify it, there's more to it, but to simplify it, it was really like repairing roads, putting people back to work, repairing bridges, working on infrastructure, things that needed work, where people who were unemployed coming out of the stock market crash, coming out of the Great Depression, things that people could do to make a wage and then at least put some money in their pocket to start spending in stores. That was really the big picture idea in a very, very basic sense. Yeah, so the League of Nations, their response to basically Hitler's Lebensraum, or his expansion, was to practice appeasement at first. So first of all, they kind of said, all right, we're going to stay out of it. We're going to stay out of it. We're going to stay out of it. Hitler took Sudetenland. Hitler took Czechoslovakia. And they do this until they have to intervene. Like once Hitler invades Poland, then they have to get involved. And that's really what starts World War II. But we will learn about the major actions that start World War II in next chapter. But those are some of the things that you really want to take a look at. Hirohito was the emperor of Japan. So really what you'd want to know is that he was kind of calling the shots in Japan prior to and then during World War II. Inflation in Germany. In the printed off notes that I gave you, there is a chart that talks about, okay, Germany doesn't raise taxes during the war. What they end up doing is they start printing money. That printed money eventually, causes people to have super inflation because money becomes less rare, and then the price of goods goes up. So what you want to know in general terms is that inflation in Germany meant that the value of the German mark was decreasing, but the price of goods was increasing. That's inflation in general, and that's what was happening in Germany. Part of it was due to the fact that Germany owed so much money to the Allies to pay off the war debts and reparations. Roosevelt is also known as FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was responsible for leading the country during this time period, and he was also the guy who put in play, I guess, the New Deal. So when I just talked about the New Deal, this simple plan to try and get the American economy back on track. I think it's 7-3 and 7-4. 7-1 and 7-2 are World War One. I'll just reference it for you real quick and make sure that we're all on the same page. I've got 7.4 and 7.5 as the topics. Pages 480 to 502. Those are the topics that are pertinent for this this chapter and this portion of the history. Francisco Franco is the rebel leader of Spain, and he became a fascist dictator in Spain. And then Hitler and Mussolini wanted to get him to join in with them in Europe, which would have put France in a position where they would have had to fight a war on two fronts. But Franco never actually joined into the Axis powers. I just answered this one about, I'd say a minute and a half ago, Emperor Hirohito was the Emperor of Japan. He was in power during the interwar periods and then during World War II. All right, any other questions that I can answer for you guys while we're here? Go ahead and fire away. Just something to put a little interest into the slideshow, Sophie B. You don't have to really know. It won't be on the quiz. Could it maybe help you in a short answer? Like if you wanted to provide an example, that's a possibility. Other than that, I just was putting it in there to make something a little bit interesting for you today. That's all. Dust Bowl could help you once again in the short answer. I don't think there's a multiple choice about it. I just was, the slideshow, I try to throw some things in there sometimes that are just kind of extenuating what we learned about, or an extension of what we learned about. So that was one of those things as well. I'm just waiting for any other questions that you might have so that I can be as helpful as possible. So if you have any questions or comments, let me know. If you want to talk about something else, I'm game for that for a few minutes. Whatever you need. If you're having some trouble, you can let me know. You always know how to find me or contact me. So I would say one thing I forgot to say is, I've been noticing this time of year that everybody's at each other. I mean, even I've been having trouble controlling, getting a little agitated in class. So, I of course, apologize if I ever get on your case. But, I just want to remind you that you could make 1,000 good decisions in your life, and you could make 1,000 good decisions this week, but it only takes one bad decision to ruin your life. So remember that when you're put into a position where you got to make a good decision, make sure you're thinking about your future and your longevity, and you're making right or good value choices. I think that's important. And I feel like as your teacher, I would be remiss if I didn't remind you to make good decisions at all times and always be wise. Count to 10 before you say something if you can. Practice metacognition. Think about how you think. I think those are good things to always keep in mind. It's part of being here now, wherever you're at. You want to make sure that you are being here now, which means that your mind is in the right state. If you know what I'm saying, your mind is not polluted. Your mind is clear. Your body is healthy. Those are very important factors. Key things that we should know about the Weimar Republic would include that the Weimar Republic became Germany's attempt at democratic government starting in 1919. They did sign on the Treaty of Versailles. They were kind of forced into doing that. They really didn't have much of a choice. They came under a lot of scrutiny from other political parties in Germany, and they didn't last very long. And then a lot of Germans blamed them for the economic problems in Germany because they're the ones who signed the treaty. But just to remind you, a republic is a form of government where people vote for leaders that then represent them in government. That's really what a republic is. We are a republic. Technically, we're a constitutionally limited republic. Okay, I don't see any more questions, so I'm going to call it a night. I just want to remind you to tell your parents thank you. Say thank you to your parents. Say your prayers tonight. Make sure you're praying for the right things. I appreciate all of you being here, and I hope that you do really well on the quiz tomorrow. God bless all of you. Have a good night.